I'm Florida Today engagement editor John A. Torres, and welcome to our continuing coverage of the 2022 elections. Today we have a special one-on-one interview with Florida State Representative Randy Fine, who is seeking election to House District 33, which covers Southern Brevard. We will conduct a separate one-on-one interview with his challenger, Democrat Anthony Yance, as well. Okay, well, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be here, Randy.
Sure.
You have won 3 general elections. You're running for your 4th general.
And last.
And last. Why are you running again?
Well, I think we've got some great things going on here in Florida. I think we've proven that our state is the state people want to move to. And so I'm running for 2 reasons. One is I want to preserve what's made Florida great. But second, we have more work to do, whether it's in education or our economy, our environment. I'm looking out for our children. There's still work to do, and I'm going to take that 6 years of experience that I have developed and learned a lot and use that to make my last 2 the best yet.
Before we talk about the items you want to accomplish and the objectives you have, what are you most proud of so far of having either accomplished or having been part of up in Tallahassee?
Well, it's a long list. I mean, I've passed close to 30 bills in my time in the legislature. Many legislators will go through their 8 years and not pass one. I think some of the things I'm particularly proud of, I passed the largest expansion of school choice in American history. So if you are a family of 4 making $100,000 a year or less, and that obviously changes for a family of 6 or a family of 3, you can get a voucher to send your child to any school that you want in Florida. That's a huge deal. It eliminates the government monopoly over schools. But I've also done a lot to fight for better history being taught in schools, for how math is taught in schools. And so there's a lot that I'm very proud of. The money I brought back for the Indian River Lagoon, telling California companies they're not going to decide how we do things here in Florida, looking out for the interests of parents. I mean, I'm very proud. I do not shy away from controversy because I'm the rare politician.
Really?
No, I'm the rare politician that doing this job is worse for me than not doing the job. Most politicians, their lives are better because they're elected. For me, my life is worse. And so if I'm not going to make it worth it, if I'm not going to go and fight the fights, I'd rather not do it at all. So I take the job very seriously.
You mentioned the Indian River Lagoon.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the state of the lagoon right now? What's happening, and is it ever going to get to where we want it to be?
Well, the state's still not good. I mean, we have a lot of work to do. We have made some progress. So we have brought home tens of millions of dollars of funding. But we're also trying to get that funding focused on the right things. So there's been a real focus over time, for example, on muck dredging. Well, muck dredging doesn't solve the problem. To some degree, cleaning out muck is like cleaning your toilet while you're still using it. I mean, you're not going to get the toilet clean.
That's an image that's really...
Well, but I think that's what it is. And if you've ever looked or touched or smelled the muck, it ain't all that different.
Yeah.
So I think that my focus has also been on policy changes. So for example, one of the things I'm proud of is we hugely increased the fines on local governments who every time it rained opened up the sewers and dumped it into the Indian River Lagoon. In part because there is a moral imperative. How can a government tell you how to live your own life if every time it rains they dump sewage in the lagoon? And but we've also brought money. I was with Governor DeSantis when he came to Sebastian Inlet State Park, which is in my current district, and announced $56 million for the Indian River Lagoon. But I've also brought projects home. Just in the last legislative session, I brought 5 water projects home, one for Palm Bay, one for West Melbourne, one for Melbourne, which are the 3 big cities in my district, plus 2 for the county. So it's both funding and policy, but there's still a long way to go. What we have to realize is if we're going to live here, we have to live here in a smart way. And unfortunately, local politicians spent decades making terrible decisions that we're now living with the consequences of.
Are the oyster beds a thing still? Is that one of the options being looked at, or one of the plans?
I think that's still something that the zoo does. I think they still do that, but clearly that's not the issue that solves the problem. We're also looking at all kinds of things. Should there be more water flow between the ocean and the inlet? So I've gotten money, for example, to study that. And there are some people who are like, look, just literally flush it out. But interestingly, apparently the science says if you do that, the inlet would become, or the river would become more salty, and more salty could make the problem worse. So it sounds good because you'll get more fresh water, but it could make the problem worse. So we're studying more inlets. We're studying, better drainage, getting rid of septic tanks. There's all kinds of things we can do, and we have to, because it's the most important reason to live in Brevard County. There's lots of places you can live where the weather's warm. We've got the ocean, and that's great, but the Indian River Lagoon is a real driver of our county, and it's a real shame the condition that it's in.
Your dad, he was a college professor, and so you moved around a little bit as a kid, Arizona, Florida. You also had spent time in Kentucky, Germany, Washington, but your formidable years were in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. What was that like, growing up in Kentucky, and how did that shape who you are today?
Well, it was an interesting childhood. So my family's from Florida. I'm third generation. My grandfather came to Florida not long after he got off the boat. My dad grew up in Florida, but my dad's legally blind, and he was before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they could say, "Oh, you can't see, you're fired." So my dad's really smart, and he said, "I want to get a job where, as my eyesight continues to get worse, they won't be able to fire me." And he realized if you get tenure as a professor, you're safe. So that's why he decided to become a professor. And when I was 3, he was offered tenure at the University of Kentucky. So that's where we moved. And that's where I grew up. It was not an easy place to grow up, though. I mean, my family wasn't from there. We didn't know anybody. And I'm Jewish. And it's not a place with a lot of Jewish people.
I actually read yesterday that the state, even today, is only 0.3% Jewish.
Yeah.
Was that tough?
It was, and look, the story I like to tell is when I had some kids, they used to say, "You're a Kentucky Fried Jew," and that wasn't a term of endearment. I think it's what they wanted to do to me. And so, interestingly, it was because I made a decision. I went to Harvard, and people ask why. One day, I had a pretty tough day at school. I remember I came home, I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I was in bad shape, and I asked my mom, I said, "Mom, what's the best college in America?" And she goes, "Harvard." And I said, "Is that in Kentucky?" And she goes, "No." And I said, "That's where I want to go." And that is what led me to do that.
And you ended up going there.
And then I ended up going there. So I think that my childhood sort of, because it was a little bit rough, it made me tougher. And I also decided that I never wanted my children or other children to have to deal with some of the things that I did, which is why I've been very focused on some of those issues, particularly relating to anti-Semitism in the legislature. But yeah, no, I would not have, the arc of my life would not be the same had I not grown up in Kentucky.
Over the years in office, you've made no secret about willing to try to get even, if you will, with your enemies. Like Jennifer Jenkins or like Dr. Mullins, Kenny Johnson, Phil Archer. Would you agree with that or not agree? Or
no, I don't. I mean, enemy is a wrong word. I think oftentimes these are sort of people that I have political differences with. I don't know any of these people personally, and in most of those instances have no reason to have any personal beef with them. For example, my understanding is Mark Mullins is a perfectly nice guy. I just think he's a terrible superintendent. And so no, I mean, I wouldn't, these people aren't enemies. I mean, I don't agree with that, at least universally there.
Gotcha, okay. There's been some talk of our governor, Ron DeSantis, going to Washington. Obviously that isn't a secret. If that happens, are you going with him? What are you hoping for, or?
Oh, I don't.
Has that been even spoken about?
No. I don't think about these things. I mean, I'm focused on, part of the reason I've been fairly successful in my life is I focus on the challenge that's directly in front of me. And that challenge right now is getting reelected to the Florida House. Assuming that happens, and I expect that it will, then my focus will be, how do I do a good job in my first term, of those 2 years. Then it'll be, how do I do a good job for the second term? Whatever happens will happen, and I'm not focused on that. The right thing, the good news is I'm very blessed. I have the flexibility to really do whatever it is that I want to do, and I have the support from my family to be able to do that. So I don't worry about that. I obviously think Governor DeSantis has done a great job, and I think he's got a great future.
Is he going to Washington, you think?
I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he goes to Washington. I mean, I don't think you work as hard as he has and not have that interest at some point. Is it 2 years from now? Is it 6 years from now? I don't know. But I think that's certainly something that's in the cards for him eventually.
I read something yesterday that said critics of the Stop Woke Act have said that teaching honestly about our country's history and its legacy shouldn't be a left-wing or a right-wing proposition. But isn't that the same thing as German textbooks ignoring the Holocaust, or
Sure, if that were the case. I think one of the extraordinary things about Florida politics is how the left literally lies about the bills that we pass. The Stop Woke Act that you mentioned really does 10 things. It says there are 9 things you can't teach. By the way, none of them are history. They're all philosophical concepts. They say, for example, you cannot say to a German child that you should feel bad because you are responsible for the Holocaust. You should not say to a white child, you should feel bad because you're responsible for slavery. It doesn't say that you shouldn't feel uncomfortable about our history. It says that the teachers shouldn't tell you how to feel. But in fact, the Stop Woke Act is the largest expansion of African American history in the history of Florida. We require, as part of that bill, not less history to be taught, we require more history to be taught. And every single person who voted against that bill voted for less African American history to be taught in the classroom. They oppose it, they don't support it.
Gotcha, okay. You mentioned earlier that there's no photos of Disney on your phone. Why is that?
Well, I mean, look, it's a very sad situation in our state. Disney is a company that's meant a lot to my family. My oldest son took his first steps on a Disney cruise. It's a company that I loved as a kid. It's a company I still love as an adult. But unfortunately, Disney has given in to this kind of woke culture of not focusing on shareholder value, but focusing on trying to placate the liberal mob. And after we passed a bill that the overwhelming majority of Floridians support, that says don't sexualize 6-year-olds, and parents are in charge, Disney decided to give in to the mob and say we're going to use the special privileges that the state of Florida has given us to try to take on Florida's parents. And I was asked to run the bill to stop that, and I did. And so that's why I joke about it. It's very sad for me because I watch this company that I care a lot about. Frankly, I've owned stock in, I think, all of my life. I've watched this company literally hurt itself. I mean, you look at, now all of the movies and products they do are focused on wokeism. They're not focused on what people want to buy. And so, you see a movie about Buzz Lightyear bomb, because it's more focused on woke principles than entertainment. Companies, whether they're conservative or liberal, should stay out of politics. There's enough politicians to care about politics. Companies should be focused on creating the products and services that people want to buy. And it's very sad that Disney's gotten away from that.
Was that bill really necessary? I've heard critics of the bill say that, LGBTQ issues were not being taught in K through 3.
Sure.
So why even
Sure.
So why even make it an issue?
Yeah, one of the things I've observed in all this is there's a strategy employed by the woke left on these things. It's a 3-part strategy. The first is to gaslight. It doesn't happen at all. It's like here in Brevard County. We don't do critical race theory. We just have a director of it. We just hire teachers. We just hire trainers. We make it mandatory. We hire a guy that says white people have an insatiable lust for the death of black people to train. But we don't do it. So the first thing is deny. Then the second thing is when you get caught, you go, well, it's really not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. There's really no problems with it. And then the third step is to say, and if you care about it, you're a racist or a bigot somehow. This was happening in Florida. There were school districts that were hiding. There's the story of Mrs. Littlejohn, whose daughter attempted to kill herself because the school district hid from the parents that she was confused about who she was. And what was extraordinary in that situation is both of her parents were child psychologists, yet the school hid this from them. These things happen in our schools, and what's interesting about it is I would say to people, well, if this isn't happening, why do you care, right? I mean, who cares, right? If we were to pass a bill that says you can't kill your parents,
right?
Who would be against it? So if we're passing a bill to make something illegal that's not happening, then why are people so bothered? It doesn't make sense. It only makes sense if they're lying about it, which in this case they were.
Okay. Back to Disney. Is there Any chance, in your opinion, for a Reedy Creek, compromise or a settlement, and would you be open to one?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the issue with Reedy Creek is Disney was given special privileges. And I'll give you one of these examples. Disney, again, there was a bit of a bait and switch. The story of Reedy Creek was Disney said, we're going to build a city. And we need the right to kind of govern ourselves as a city. So please give us these special rights and privileges. Well, then they didn't actually build the city. They built theme parks, but they didn't build a city. And people will say to me, well, wait, they built Celebration. Interestingly, when they built Celebration, they kicked it out of the special district when they actually did build things where cities. But we gave Disney the right, for example, to create taxpayer-backed debt, government debt that the taxpayers owe. As a matter of public policy, is it a good idea for a private corporation to be able to issue taxpayer debt? I would argue that's probably not a good idea. So they were given all these privileges 50, 60, 70 years ago. A lot of them didn't make any sense. And there were people, frankly, who wanted to change this for decades, but Disney had too much political power. I think what happened is they kind of blew it on this bill, and so they lost a lot of it. But Disney had the right to seize private property. They had the right of eminent domain. So, for example, if the county wants to make the road bigger out here, they can do that. They could take your building where your office is. Right. They've got to pay you, but they could take it even if you don't want them to. They could take it to make the road wider. We gave a private company that same power. So some of these things are just a bad idea. So is it possible that Reedy Creek could be reconstituted? Sure, and I think those discussions are ongoing. But I think that some of these special privileges won't happen. The last thing I would say on it is, why should Disney get special privileges that Universal Studios does not? Disney has 4 theme parks. Universal Studios is about to have 3. Why should Disney get special privileges that Universal doesn't have? It's not fair. It's not fair to Universal. It's not fair to SeaWorld and Busch Gardens and anybody else who might want to open a theme park in Florida. I think that's part of the issue as well.
Would this have even come up, though, if they hadn't been opposed to that parental rights bill?
The answer is it's come up constantly. But Disney had too much political power. They were able to stop it. I think what happened is they blew all of their political power by kind of arguing and spitting in the face of parents. There have been people who've wanted to do what we did for decades. Disney was just too powerful. So for those people who like to argue that money determines politics, that big corporations run the show, I think that bill kind of proves that they're not right.
Over the weekend, Florida Today did a big story on hunger in the county.
Mm-hmm. I saw it.
And you were featured in a sidebar of the story, and you've been pretty vocal about it, and it seems to really affect you. Can you talk about the need, and were you shocked by what you learned or saw, and what can the state do right now, or what can you help do to alleviate that?
Well, I'll tell you, so when COVID happened, I felt very bad for people. Because you have to remember, the government told people you can't go to work, and then the unemployment system didn't work well because it wasn't ever anticipated for 20 million people to come on in at once. So people literally were hungry, and so we started working with this group called Farm Share, and we were giving out food every week, and we did it through COVID, and we did it for a while, and then late last year, we did one, and we couldn't give the food away. November, December. We had food for 500 families. We couldn't give it away. 100 people showed up. So I hadn't done one for a while. And then I had a few people call and say, hey, would you consider doing another one? And I said, sure. So we did one a couple of weeks ago. And I knew that inflation was bad. But look, I'm a retired businessman. I'm not going to lie to people. Inflation irritates me. I can't believe my grocery bill is so high. But in my family, we don't have to make trade-offs. It's just annoying. I didn't realize how much Bidenflation was hurting people. Joe Biden's policies have really crushed people. And so we did this food drive, had food for 500 people, and the line was 5 miles long.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was unbelievable. And it was horrible for me because a woman, I should have felt good, but a woman pulled up crying. And I'll never forget it. And I said, are you okay? Because I open the trunks for people when they come through. I said, why are you crying? She goes, because I haven't eaten in 2 days.
Oh, my.
And thank you, because I'm going to be able to go home and eat something. And she's emailed me since. And it just, I'm stunned by the level of suffering, which your article pointed out, because Joe Biden will talk about inflation's not that big a deal. We're creating all these jobs, but clearly there's a lot of people who are suffering right now. So we've gone back to Farm Share and said, how many of these can we do? Can we go back to doing them once a week or twice a month? And how much food can you get us? Because, I'd like to be able to help people. But, a lot of times people say, look, people who are, picking up food, they're abusing the system. There's no one who chooses not to eat for 2 days.
Right.
No one says, you know what, I could work, but I won't, and I'll just be hungry. This is literally somebody who is in a bad situation, and we're going to do what we can to help them out. Unfortunately, we can't solve all the problem. I mean, Joe Biden, we can't fix inflation. We've done what we can at the legislative level. In a couple of days, October 1st, gas taxes will go down. That's something I was very proud to work on. So people will get more money in their pocket. I think we're cutting them by 28 cents a gallon, which is the state gas tax. But we can't solve the mess that Joe Biden has gotten us into, but we can try to do what we can around the edges.
I was stunned when our editorial board, we had a tour of our Rockledge Community Kitchens that handles Meals on Wheels, and they told us there was a 500-person waiting list. 500 people have contacted them for food that aren't going to be getting any because they're on a waiting list.
I'm not surprised. I mean, again, we had food for 500. I think we could have given out food for 2,000 or 3,000. I don't even know how people found out about it. It's not like I'm.
So did you turn people? Like you had to turn people away?
Oh yeah, we had to turn people away. The vast majority of people we had to turn away.
Oh, wow.
And what's crazy is I hand out flyers to people when they come through, and I didn't put on that flyer. We had dates in October and November already committed, but I didn't want to put those dates on the flyer because I said, what if it's like last December? Remember, last December couldn't give the food away.
Right.
So from last December, where we have food for 500 families and we can't get 100 cars to show up, here we are in September, we have food for 500 families and the line's 5 miles long. No, we turned away hundreds, thousands of cars. And we're trying to work with them so that when we do more of them, we won't have that problem again. But there's clearly a problem, and it's Washington's going to have to make some big changes, but this inflation's killing people.
When was the last time somebody changed your mind about something?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it would probably be that food drive. I didn't know that there was that much need, and it wasn't somebody. It was the totality of those cars. It was probably that woman crying and making me realize how strong the issue was. I think there are people who have influenced me. The one before that, I would think, was a very brave Disney employee who sent us something, who was gay, and wrote me and said, thank you for doing what you're doing. What my company's doing, doesn't speak for me. I may be gay. I don't think that 7-year-olds should be told, you don't know if you're a boy or a girl. And I said, and the guy wrote me, he's like, I'm bothered by the fact that I get lumped in with this. Yeah, I'm gay. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean I believe this is appropriate for little kids. That didn't change my mind, but it was reinforcing on those kinds of things. Look, I've had a certain perspective on the world since I was a kid. I'm not somebody, I was conservative when I was 18. I'm just as conservative when I'm 48. So my principles have never really changed. I used to tell people, when you're a conservative and you go to Harvard, there weren't many of us. And it's like they put you on an anvil and they beat you. And one of two things happens. They either beat it out of you or you end up strong as steel. That's what happened with me. They tried, it just didn't work. So, I can't think, I learn a lot about issues every day, but in terms of my principles changing, I can't really think of an example.
If elected, are you still going to try to move forward with a bill that would prohibit, our medical doctors from doing any sort of trans work on minors?
Yeah, I'm hopeful to work with our leadership team and our speaker. I don't, if you're an adult and you want to do what you want to your body, you're an adult, have at it. But the purpose of childhood is to not make mistakes that you can't undo. It's why the criminal justice system, which you cover a lot, we're supposed to treat you differently when you're 16 than when you're 26. Sure. we should not have children make decisions that they cannot undo later. So in the bill that I've talked about, I've said, look, if you're a boy and you want to wear girls' clothes, you can always change back into boys' clothes. Or you want to be called something different, you can always change your mind. But if you cut a body part off, that ain't ever coming back. You take puberty blockers, that will have life-altering decisions. And what's extraordinary is these progressive European countries, they're all pulling back. They've said this isn't a good idea for kids to be doing this, whereas our woke left now wants to push it. What we're doing now, they were doing 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they've concluded this isn't a good idea, and they're moving back in that direction. I just don't think kids should be doing this.
Lastly, we are increasingly, it seems as if we're really polarized as a nation. Should politicians try to work across the aisle to reduce that polarization and that sense that opponents are enemies? And do you have any examples where you could do that? Or
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, most bills in Tallahassee are like that. We do a lot of bipartisan work. Most of the bills that I pass have Democratic support. And many of them they'll have something called a prime co-sponsor. It's like somebody else who's on the bill with you is often a Democrat. I have lots of those that I have done. But I think what is important in our country is for people part of the problem that we have is people are not honest about the facts. You can differ about what facts mean, but you have to agree on what they are. And I think there's way too much focus right now on gaslighting. And if people don't like the facts because they don't fit their narrative, they will deny that the facts exist. I mean, Joe Biden will say inflation's not a problem as the stock market is collapsing. That's not helpful. And so I think what we need to do is we can disagree on how to solve the problems, but if we don't agree that there are the problems. I think the other issue we have in America, and I don't know how we solve this one, I don't know that we all share the same values anymore. And that was 50 years ago, we all shared the same values. We just wanted to get to the end result a little bit differently. Today, I think in some cases those values are fundamentally different, and I don't know how we bridge that gap.
And in 45 seconds, tell our viewers why they should vote for you.
Well, they should vote for me if they like what I've done. I'm pretty well known. I'm very visible on social media. I work hard. I take the job seriously. And I think if people like the results that I have gotten, I work at the job the way that I do because it's very effective. I bring home more money than anyone else. I get more bills passed than anyone else. And if people like what I have done, whether it's how I dealt with COVID or hurricanes or education or these food drives, whatever it is, these are things that I do that other people don't. And I think if they want the last 2 years to be like the last 6, then they should vote for me. If they don't like the last 6 years, then they shouldn't. And I'll be okay with that outcome. That's certainly not what I expect. But I am who I am. I'm not going to change. And I'm going to keep doing what I think is best for the people of South Brevard.
Randy, I appreciate the time as always. Thank you.
Of course.
And good luck on your
Thanks.
campaign trail.
Appreciate it very much.